South Africa has witnessed mass killings in various provinces in recent weeks and months, with a fair share of those killings happening in rural Eastern Cape. Now, in light of these unending cases of mass killings in South Africa, we explore the subject of whether crime and safety in rural areas or township areas is worth examining in its own right. Now, what are the contributing factors as to why these violent crimes are prevalent in less affluent areas? Is there any link between spatial concentration and increased violent crime levels? And do turf wars have anything to do with the level of violence? To talk more on this, we're now joined by criminologist Professor Kholofelo Rakubu, who joins us now. Prof, thank you so much for your time. I hope we can hear each other this time around. So maybe if we can start here. We have seen most of these crimes happening in mainly township and rural areas. What could be the reason for that?
There are multiple reasons. We must now understand the gun violence in itself, that it disproportionately occurs in communities largely experiencing social and economic inequalities. We start there, and that include residential or racial segregation and concentrated poverty. Now, when we look into townships, the violence is also associated with the neighborhood characteristics. We should start there as well, particularly characterized by social disorder, one, such as less cohesion. When there's less cohesion in neighborhoods and less collective efficacy amongst residents, when you tap into those townships, you find breakdowns of social cohesion and lack, and also the cyclical perpetuation of violence, normalization of violence, or neighborhood stigma. There are certain communities or provinces associated with violence, and that has been normalized. But as we provide a diagnostic analysis of this mass shooting in South Africa, we zoom into easy access to firearms, availability of these illegal firearms, the culture of violence as well, the socioeconomic factors, the issues with the principles of crime prevention through environmental design. Because if you zoom into the Eastern Cape, for example, it is segregated, it is isolated. But again, what hinders effective implementation of the laws or dealing with crime in general? We have to zoom into the corruption within the justice system, difficulty dealing with the lack of utilization of intelligence, for lack of better word, and poor community-police relation or police-community relations. There seems to be disparities between what the community expects and what the police expect. So the police are working in silo, mostly in those areas. But largely, South Africa as a whole, just because we have loopholes within our legal prescripts that are supposed to assist in gun ownership or even gun control, that continues to find us wanting as the country, because easy access, availability, porous borders. So it's a whole lot of issues that are perpetuating level of violence or level of mass shooting. But poor intelligence, because intelligence is supposed to project what might happen in the Eastern Cape, for example, because if you check since the beginning of this year, how many mass shootings or gun violence crimes gun crimes have been reported in that province? Are we failing as intelligence to project where is it coming from, or what is the feeder in that regard, irregardless of all other standing issues that I've just highlighted? The province in its own is left highly vulnerable, but communities, especially rural communities, will continue to be vulnerable due to what, like I said, residential segregation, racial segregation, and all other less cohesion and poor collective efficacy amongst residents, because it starts with communities to come together to come up with their own safety plan that should marry the police plan, because the police alone cannot come into communities and present solutions. These things should work together. So when one criticizes political leg is destabilized, then it's going to be very difficult, because we depend on communities to report. We depend on communities to assist with community diagnosis, because they better understand their own community issues, to assist come up with a solution. Because in most communities, we come up with solutions that are not direct, because communities were not part of that community decision making. So in this regard, the Eastern Cape is just suffering largely due to easy access. It is highly vulnerable. It is undermined. A lot of resources are required. It is segregated. Then generally, it's suffering from the loopholes, particularly with the Firearm Control Act that has been having issues for quite some time. That was also proposed for amendments and review to identify issues that perpetuate ownership, illegal ownership, and so forth.
And also, Prof, I think you just touched on a very important aspect, and that is the line of reporting these crimes. You know, sure, a crime happens now, but also to report it is another thing, especially when we look at these rural areas where victims would still have to, on many occasions, walk a very long distance to even access a police station, which is also on many occasions short-staffed or lacks resources in a way. And also those CPF members who don't really have the necessary resources to ensure that they tackle and deal with crime effectively. What do you think needs to be done to address all these gaps that we're seeing?
Let's zoom into the issues around CPF, because Community Policing Forum is very critical. They don't have the relevant resources to assist with crime prevention in most provinces, right? And the CPF is also meant by political infiltrations, wherein some members don't even participate or collaborate or assist CPF because it is made by political infiltration. And then again, issues of resources. Department of Community Safety, for example, should come in to empower them, because I think they were empowered previously. However, crime has evolved tremendously, and you find that CPF member still has a particular skill that is no longer relevant today. A CPF member must be well equipped in crime communication and many other aspects to be able to bridge a gap, because they are very critical in crime reporting. But again, you just mentioned issues of accessibility of the police stations, for example, issues around whistleblower protection. Who's going to risk their life to report when they know some of the police members are within the payrolls of these gang members? So you see that also poses a serious threat to crime reporting. Hence, communities decide on their own mechanism and try to defend themselves, and communities end up owning illegal firearms because they are left with no choice but to protect themselves. So now it becomes a vicious cycle that everybody now is going to own an illegal firearm, because there's no way we are going to solve issues of accessibility very soon, because this issue has been there for quite some time. Community members have to catch a taxi to go and report a case, and you have to queue when you arrive there. So you rather decide not to do anything. And then that is when now we are left where we are with this high rate of mass shootings, because these offenders or criminals, they do as they please. But again, generally, an offender in South Africa is always going to continue doing as they please, because of what? There are multiple policies that are on their side. Like I always say, our justice system is too offender-centered. They get so much attention, and the punishment does not even match the crime committed. Once we revisit, or now once we come up with restrictive laws or even restrictive firearm laws, we might get somewhere, because restrictive firearms laws and lower firearm ownership levels can lower level of gun violence. But as it stands now, every Tom, Dick, and Harry in South Africa might own a firearm, because we have issues with the pool of illegal firearm, the issues with the loss and theft of firearm. Amnesties have not worked for quite some time, because even the search and seizures, they have not worked because of what? Corruption within law enforcement and poor enforcement in itself, and also enforcement that is not backed up by thorough crime intelligence. So we are back to square one.
And I know that just as we started our conversation, you also touched on social cohesion, which is also a very important element when we look at our communities. And I'm going to just turn sharp focus to those rural communities that you also spoke about, as well as our townships. We're known to actually know each other, particularly when we look at the township setting where you know your neighbor, you know. Also in the rural area as well, you know that who's in that other lali in most occasions. What has happened, you know, to that sort of link, to that sort of connection where you know people that the neighbor will actually know who might be in a position to be committing all of these crimes? And what has led to just everyone having the sense of just looking out for themselves?
Like I said, we lost it somewhere as communities, the lack of social cohesion, and but we can now just look into the neighborhood stigma. As much as we can try to work on the social cohesion, but neighborhood stigma and normalization of violence. This is a whole paradigm shift, and a paradigm shift in rural safety. We previously knew rural safety as being very inclusive, right? They were one when it comes to issues of rural safety. But what led to issues now? The poor understanding of crime role by traditional leaders. Traditional leaders have tapped into politicizing crime prevention to an extent that they left their communities behind. Hence, now everybody has to fend for themselves, because communities had an understanding of their role in community in building their own safety plans, safety forums, and structures. But lately, if you go to communities, they don't even know who stays next door. They are harboring offenders that are mostly wanted in rural communities, right? Social structures have collapsed to an extent that a gang can just come into a community and do as they please without even being noticed. A gang can come and stay in a community and build up its own crime landscape without even a chief knowing or understanding until they get shot. Now, this now suggests paradigm shift in rural safety, back to basics, where now you identify a community thoroughly, you conduct community diagnostic analysis to understand who is in my community and for what reason. Where are the police stations and how to access them? Who is the CPF chairperson, for example? And separation of powers there. It cannot be politicized, because if now a chairperson belongs to a particular political party and a chief belongs to another, then the CPF does not even function. Now, if we zoom into these communities as well, where are community safety forums? Where are the municipalities? Because during manifestos, these municipalities goes to the very same communities to say, we are going to protect you. This is our manifesto. This is our IDP. This is how we're going to protect you. But the minute they get those votes, they are nowhere to be found. Because if we go to the Eastern Cape, there is a particular responsible municipality with an IDP that is inclusive of safety on paper only, and there should be repercussions for such, because now when you want votes, you promise to bridge a gap, you promise to partner with SABC, you promise to support community structures, but the minute you get votes, you disappear.
All right, that was criminologist Professor Kholofelo Rakubu. Thanks so much indeed for your insights. They're talking to us there about the mass killings that have been happening a lot recently in the country.